The absolute climax of Richard's journey unfolds inside the drab, fluorescent-lit conference room of the Rancho Cucamonga factory, a space usually reserved for sterile corporate presentations. Roger Enrico travels across the country with a caravan of high-ranking, sharply dressed executives to hear the pitch in person. The local management team, including a deeply embarrassed and furious Lonnie Mason, sits along the wall, fully expecting a disaster. Richard walks into the room wearing a cheap, oversized tie he bought with his last remaining dollars, his hands trembling slightly as he places his homemade product samples on the table. The story kicks off in the sun-baked, dusty landscape of 1960s Southern California, where a young Richard Montañez learns early on that the world treats you differently when your last name is Gonzalez or Martinez. Growing up in a migrant labor camp, his world is defined by the punishing heat of the fields, the calloused hands of his strict father Vacho, and a systemic bias that renders Chicano kids practically invisible. In the school cafeteria, the white kids mock the homemade bean burritos his mother packs for him, turning lunchtime into a gauntlet of humiliation. But instead of retreating into shame, Richard's innate entrepreneurial spirit sparks to life. With a brilliant stroke of playground diplomacy, he offers a bite to one of his regular tormentors. The kid's eyes light up because good food doesn't care about prejudice. Recognizing a wide-open market, Richard recruits his young childhood sweetheart, Judy, to help him mass-produce and sell the burritos to classmates for $0.25 a pop. It is his very first taste of the hustle, a fleeting moment of triumph where his cultural identity becomes his greatest asset. But the victory is short-lived. The school administration and local police refuse to believe a Mexican kid could earn money honestly. A cruel arrest shatters his boyhood venture, introducing him to a cycle of institutional distrust that will follow him all the way into adulthood, forcing a young mind to adapt to a far harsher concrete jungle. As the calendar flips into the late 1970s and early 1980s, the playground innocence evaporates completely, replaced by the gritty, neon-tinged shadows of gang life. Richard and Judy are now married, surviving on the razor's edge of the law as slick, street-smart hoodlums. They roll through the neighborhood in lowriders, hustling stolen goods and running drugs because the legitimate job market offers absolutely nothing to a high school dropout with a record. The tension is a constant, suffocating hum in the background of their lives, punctuated by sirens and back-alley deals. But the universe shifts on its axis the moment Judy looks into Richard's eyes and tells him she is pregnant with their first child. The news hits Richard like a physical blow, a sudden wave of terrifying clarity washing away the thrill of the streets. A subsequent, final arrest brings him face-to-face with a stern judge who delivers a blunt ultimatum: change your life now, or your child will grow up looking at you through a prison glass partition. Standing at this terrifying crossroads, Richard swears to go straight. He turns to his old street comrade, Tony Romero, seeking any pathway away from the abyss. Tony hands him a lifeline tip about an open position at the massive Frito-Lay manufacturing plant in Rancho Cucamonga. It is a chance at a clean slate, but to even cross the threshold, Richard has to confront a system that views him as a liability before he even speaks a single word. Securing that Frito-Lay job requires one final, desperate gamble against corporate bureaucracy. Richard stands in the sterile lobby of the plant, staring down at a complex employment application that his limited reading skills cannot decipher. Humiliated but desperate, he sneaks the paperwork home to their cramped apartment, where Judy sits with him under the dim light of a kitchen lamp. Together, they construct a version of Richard that the corporate world might actually hire, outright fabricating a high school graduation detail on the resume. When he returns for the official interview with the floor manager, Lonnie Mason, the deception is exposed almost immediately. Lonnie, a rigid company man, catches the lie about the high school pedigree with a cold, knowing smirk. But instead of walking out, Richard digs his heels into the linoleum floor. He delivers a raw, deeply impassioned pitch about his work ethic, his willingness to sweat, and his absolute refusal to fail. He looks Lonnie in the eye and promises to be the hardest working janitor the facility has ever seen. Intrigued by this sheer, unfiltered bravado, Lonnie takes a chance on him, uttering a condescending line about how Mexicans are at least good at manual labor. Richard swallows the casual racism with a forced, practiced smile. He walks away with a uniform and a heavy mop, completely aware of the corporate caste system but fiercely determined to turn this lowest rung of the ladder into a launching pad. The cavernous interior of the Rancho Cucamonga factory is a deafening symphony of clanking metal, whirring conveyor belts, and the overwhelming scent of toasted corn in hot oil. To most, it is just a place to punch a clock, but to Richard, it is a high-tech wonderland waiting to be understood. While pushing his gray mop bucket through the slick corridors, his eyes aren't on the floors, they are glued to the massive, intricate machinery pulsing all around him. He becomes an omnipresent, intensely curious shadow to Clarence C. Baker, the brilliant, self-taught African-American maintenance engineer who keeps the entire plant's heart beating. Clarence initially treats the overly enthusiastic janitor with cold skepticism, weary of corporate distractions. But Richard breaks through his defenses using a classic trick from his school days, sharing a delicious, home-cooked burrito during a quiet break. Bound by their shared status as overlooked minorities within the corporate machine, Clarence relents and takes Richard under his wing. He begins teaching him the delicate nuances of the complex assembly lines, demonstrating how the raw corn paste is extruded, baked, and transformed into crunchy snacks. Richard absorbs the technical knowledge like a sponge, memorizing the precise mechanics of the machines and realizing that true empowerment within these walls starts with understanding the very technology that drives the company's profits. The narrative takes a somber, high-stakes turn as the 1980s economic recession begins to claw its way into the manufacturing sector. The Reagan administration's fiscal policies trickle down to the factory floor, and Frito-Lay stock prices take a terrifying, downward plunge. change. Inside the Rancho Cucamonga plant, the cheerful hum of production is replaced by an anxious, heavy silence as rumors of catastrophic layoffs spread like wildfire. Richard watches in heartbreak as longtime workers, men with families and decades of service, are handed pink slips and escorted out the doors. It is a corporate winter, and survival feels entirely out of reach. In a desperate bid to rally the remaining global workforce, Frito-Lay CEO Roger Enrico broadcasts a slick, highly polished motivational video to every facility. Sitting in the dim break room, Richard stares intently at the television screen as the charismatic executive delivers a direct, unexpected command: think like a CEO. While most of his exhausted, cynical co-workers scoff at the corporate jargon and walk away, the phrase hooks deep into Richard's brain. He takes the instruction literally, internalizing the idea that he is no longer just a man with a broom, but a custodian of the company's future. He begins looking at the empty shelves and dropping sales numbers not with fear, but through the analytical lens of a businessman searching for a missing puzzle piece. The lightning bolt of pure inspiration strikes in the most authentic community setting imaginable. After comforting his eldest son over schoolyard bullying, Richard takes his boys to a local park where a street vendor sells Elote's traditional grilled corn slathered in butter, mayonnaise, and a heavy dusting of fiery chili powder. Sitting at a picnic table, his youngest son, Stephen, takes an ambitious bite, instantly yelling out that his mouth is on fire. When Richard jokingly tells him to stop eating it, the boy stubbornly refuses, smiling through his watering eyes to declare that the spice actually burns good. The simple phrase echoes heavily in Richard's mind, triggering an immediate, profound realization. Time slows down as he looks around the vibrant park, suddenly seeing his community clearly, a massive, thriving Latino demographic completely ignored by corporate snack brands that only peddle bland, cheesy snacks. He watches people dousing fruit in tagine and tacos and salsa, realizing the corporate world is entirely blind to a market that injects heat into every single meal. The pieces instantly lock into place. If you put that authentic, spicy Mexican flavor profile onto a Frito-Lay chip, you disrupt the entire industry. Armed with a singular, consuming vision, Richard convinces a reluctant Clarence to let him smuggle a few trash bags full of unseasoned, naked Cheetos out of the factory doors. The Montañez kitchen instantly transforms into a chaotic, highly experimental flavor laboratory, bathed in the warm, golden glow of their apartment lights. Richard, Judy, and the boys gather around the counter like alchemists, surrounded by dozens of glass bowls overflowing with every Mexican spice imaginable: cayenne, habanero, jalapeno, and secret family chili blends. They spend consecutive, exhausting nights dusting the plain yellow snacks, shaking them in plastic baggies, and tasting the results. The early attempts are absolute disasters, either leaving their mouths blistered in pain or tasting completely bitter and unpalatable. When Richard seeks encouragement from his stern father Vacho, he is met with a harsh, devastating putdown about how a janitor should stay in his place. But the rejection only fuels Judy's fierce, protective devotion. She rallies her husband, refusing to let him abandon his dream. They adjust the ratios, balancing the heat with salt and acid, until one fateful night, little Stephen takes a bite of a newly coated chip, closes his eyes, and declares it perfect. They have successfully captured the soul of Chicano cuisine on a single piece of puffed corn, creating a vibrant red dust that will change everything. With the perfect recipe sealed in plastic baggies, Richard faces a massive, seemingly impenetrable corporate wall. He tries to pitch the spicy creation to his direct supervisor, Lonnie Mason, but is immediately laughed out of the office, told in no uncertain terms that corporate executives don't take advice from the cleaning staff. Recognizing that the chain of command is a dead end, Richard decides to take the CEO's video message to its absolute, literal conclusion. He sneaks into the executive offices after hours, his heartbeat thumping wildly in his chest as he copies Roger Enrico's private phone number from a corporate directory. The next day, standing by a public payphone, Richard takes a deep breath and dials the long-distance number straight to Frito-Lay's multi-million-dollar headquarters. By a stroke of absolute luck, he bypasses the initial wave of handlers and connects with Patty, Enrico's fiercely protective executive assistant. Instead of folding under pressure, Richard uses his raw, unfiltered charm, explaining that he is a janitor calling from the Rancho Cucamonga plant because he has an idea that will save their jobs. Fascinated by the sheer, unprecedented audacity of the call, Patty unlatches the corporate gates and patches him directly through to the big boss himself. Roger Enrico listens in stunned silence as a custodian passionately outlines a billion-dollar market opportunity, completely captivating the CEO. When the presentation begins, Richard completely abandons the traditional, data-heavy corporate jargon he tried to memorize. Instead, he speaks directly from the heart, delivering an evocative, deeply personal eulogy for his community. He explains that the Latino market isn't a statistical line item on a spreadsheet, it is a massive, proud, and hungry demographic waiting to be seen and respected by the brands they buy. He describes the flavor not as a product, but as an extension of identity. Enrico watches intently, deeply moved by the absolute sincerity and raw business instinct standing before him. The CEO reaches down, takes one of the vibrant red chips, and bites into it. The loud, decisive crunch echoes through the silent room, cementing a historic turning point. The green light from the executive board should be the ultimate victory, but the corporate machine constructs one final, incredibly dangerous trap for Richard's brainchild. Frito-Lay initiates a ghost launch, releasing Flamin Hot Cheetos into selected markets but completely withholding any financial backing for television commercials, billboards, or radio advertisements. The product sits silently on the bottom shelves of convenience stores, and the initial sales figures are dangerously stagnant. Lonnie Mason gleefully prepares to cancel the entire line, chalking it up as an expensive mistake. Realizing that his dream is about to be quietly suffocated by corporate apathy, Richard refuses to let his creation die in the dark. He organizes a massive, grassroots guerrilla marketing campaign right out of his neighborhood. He gathers his family, his street-smart friends, and his fellow factory workers, distributing boxes of the red-hot chips directly from the trunks of cars. They visit local parks, community centers, car shows, and corner stores, personally handing bags to Chicano consumers and urging them to demand the flavor at every major supermarket. It is a beautiful, chaotic display of community power, a collective uprising of an overlooked demographic proving that their cultural buying power can dismantle any corporate obstacle placed in their path. The grassroots hustle ignites an absolute wildfire of consumer demand, and the convenience store computers begin logging unprecedented, astronomical sales numbers. The corporate offices in Dallas are sent into an absolute frenzy as orders for the spicy seasoning skyrocket beyond anything the company has ever witnessed in its history. Back at the Rancho Cucamonga facility, the heavy threat of layoffs completely evaporates, replaced by the triumphant, roaring sound of maximum production lines running 24 hours a day. Clarence Baker secures the prestigious engineering promotion he earned long ago, but Richard is still seen pushing his gray mop down the main corridor. Suddenly, Lonnie Mason approaches him with an uncharacteristically quiet demeanor, instructing him to drop his broom and report immediately to the executive offices upstairs. Richard walks into the room to find Roger and Rico waiting for him. The CEO looks at the former gang member turned custodian and acknowledges the immense corporate bias that kept him cleaning floors while saving the company's financial future. With a proud smile, Enrico officially promotes Richard to the newly created position of Director of Multicultural Marketing. Richard steps out onto the balcony, looking down at the cheering factory floor below, his eyes shining with tears as he calls Judy to tell her they finally made it.